The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, the Progressive Conservative Party's popularity remains as high as ever. But are there storm clouds on the horizon? We look back at an eventful summer at Queen's Park and what's ahead. Season 19 of The Agenda starts right now. The more things change at Queen's Park, the more they stay the same. What changed this summer? A new, biggest provincial cabinet of all time, a new education minister, but only for a few months because he liked the job so much he quit politics altogether, a new policy on safe injection sites. But what stays the same? Doug Ford's Conservatives are still the overwhelming first choice among voters. Let's mull over all of what's percolating at the Pink Palace with Brian Lilly, political columnist, Toronto Sun; Laura Stone, Globe and Mail reporter based at Queen's Park; Jessica Smith-Cross, editor-in-chief at the Trillium; and Greg Brady, the morning radio host of Toronto Today on 640 Toronto. And we are delighted to welcome all four of you here around this table for this, our first program of our 19th season here on TVO. What do you say we put the new guy to work right away?
Happy to.
Here we go. This is, I want to read you this quote here of David Coletto, the pollster, as quoted by Robert Benzie, our pal in the Toronto Star. And it goes like this. Sheldon, bring the graphic up if you would. It's an enigma. He, the Premier, is withstanding the same pressures that a lot of other political leaders haven't been able to. And so the question is, why? He's polarizing in the sense that if you don't like him, you don't like him. And there's a lot of Ontarians who don't like Doug Ford, says Coletto. But he has enough who do, and they think he's just a friendly, nice guy who isn't perfect, but admits mistakes when he makes them and tries to fix them, the pollster said. He's forgiven because he asks for forgiveness. Let's go around the table and get some theories on why the Tories are still number one in this province. Fire away.
Well, I think the opposition, specifically the Ontario opposition, and I think the Liberal Party, as they're kind of rebuilding from the ashes, and I think they're headed in the right direction. They're focused on the person and not the party and the policies. So I think they need to kind of gear away from Doug Ford this. You won't even hear Marit Stiles use his first name. It's just Ford does this, Ford does that. I think it's the wrong strategy. Call them the Conservatives. Talk about what the Conservatives are doing to healthcare, what the Conservatives are doing to education. I think you've got a winner. Steve, they've been trying this for the better part of 5.5 years now, and it's not working. He's enigmatic. He's got a personality. I can't tell you how many times my phone rings or text, and it's him telling a story about getting a haircut, almost as short as mine right now, down in Florida for $20, or he swallows a bee and he makes it work. And either it's a rival MPP, or at times it's been an opposition leader or a leadership candidate, and they're like, how does he do it? I can't do it quite like that. And that's working for him right now. So they should talk about the party and not the person.
Jesse, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I agree. My personal theory on this is it's how Doug Ford talks. He talks like a real human being, not a politician. He stumbles over his words. He gets things wrong. He doesn't always make complete sense, but you get what he's getting at and you feel like you understand him. And it's so rare and it's so powerful in politics. It really makes an impression on voters that this is a guy I like.
Laura.
I think, to the point about Doug Ford admitting his mistakes and admitting when he's wrong, I think that's rare in politics. You don't hear that a lot, or when you hear it from other politicians, perhaps they try to put too much of a positive spin on it and still trying to make themselves look good. I think we've seen Doug Ford out there, and it's a bit of a joke now at Queen's Park, reversing his reversals, and how many times has he changed course on this and that, on major policies like the Greenbelt, which we saw last summer. But he kind of comes clean, he looks into the camera and he says he's sorry, and I think that is a rare quality in politics. He's also a populist. He came out this summer talking about liberalizing booze. We're going to have alcohol in corner stores this week. That's a popular policy, and there may be people who disagree with that and people in the healthcare sector who are concerned about the ramifications of that, but I do think all in all, most Ontarians kind of agree with that as a common sense thing to do.
Brian.
On the forgiveness part, I was watching Justin Trudeau last week admit that he made a mistake, and he handled it very differently. So the whole immigration file with temporary foreign workers, even he admits he got it at, it's out of control. But instead of saying, I made a mistake, or my government made a mistake, and we're going to fix it, and we're sorry, he blamed the business community and said, well, we just did what they asked for, and they demanded this at the time. And he's trying to explain away. And I thought, I thought at the time, if he'd just do what Ford does, he would get a lot more sympathy from an electorate that's not giving him a lot of sympathy right now. So I think that forgiveness thing, it can be tough to know what his policy is, because if you don't like minutes, but I think that does sit well with voters.
On the other hand, yes, the Conservatives are in first place provincially as a party. If you go do the deep dive on the Coletto numbers, you will discover that Doug Ford is the least popular of all the provincial party leaders. In fact, if you take the sort of this percentage of the public approves him, this percentage of the public disapproves him, he's at minus 65, which is 3 times worse than anybody else. Laura, explain how his party can be number one and he can be so personally unpopular. How does that compute?
I think it's possible that people don't like Ford himself, but they might kind of reluctantly agree or maybe not completely disagree with things that he's doing. They're not completely offended by the policies themselves. I think it also points back to a point that Greg was making about the opposition. We haven't seen the opposition able to kind of garner a stronghold with the electorate. Bonnie Crombie is still trying to define the Liberal Party. We haven't heard too much from her over the summer. Marit Stiles seems to kind of focus on issues that are only appealing to her base as the NDP. She hasn't been able to kind of broaden that to a certain extent. So I think it speaks to where the opposition leaders are as much as it speaks to Doug Ford himself.
And again, if you do the deep dive of the numbers, David Coletto goes on to say, quote, ethics and being careful with taxpayers' money and honesty remain areas of vulnerability. How come?
I've heard that from Conservatives. And so if you have people who support the party have those concerns, they're going to be telling the pollsters that. And also, the people who support the Liberals or the NDP are going to have the same concerns. But it's bleeding into Pierre Poilievre conservatives, more conservative conservatives who don't really love Doug Ford.
When we talk on your radio station, we often talk about how the Premier, there's a new verb to describe what the Premier does. It's called Douglasing. What does that mean?
It's tough to tell if it's just physical or mental or it's just an emotion you feel. But I look and I go, I think polarizing also. When we talk about a populist kind of polarize. You're either with or you don't. It's important to be interesting. He is an interesting person. We can watch a news conference and kind of hang on his every word and wait for that moment where he might lose it. That said, I think all 5 of us would agree we see a different Doug Ford post-pandemic. We see a more measured Ford. He felt like a loose cannon at City Council. He was over-defensive of his brother personally and professionally. I think at times loved his obviously his younger brother. But I think we've seen somebody that's more measured, that picks his spots and tries to hit that. He did that news conference with a shooting at a Jewish school, shooting out the windows, with Olivia Chow and Justin Trudeau, and it resonated with people. Now, I thought he said a little bit too much, taking a guess at where the would-be shooters were from and whether they were Canadian or not. People didn't like that. But outside of that comment, the other 9 comments, they hit the base and they go, there's a leader that's willing to step out there and at least, as we said, be human and have human emotions about things.
You talked about press conferences, and the Premier does one, I don't know, once or twice a week. And Brian, he did one this morning. Yeah. And he said something kind of interesting when he was asked a couple of times, maybe 3 or 4 times, about whether there would be an election next year, because there's not supposed to be until 2026 in the month of June. And, he danced around and played around a little bit with all that. As we sit here trying to understand what the justification would be for having an election a year early and incurring $150 million of costs in order to hold that election a year early, what justification do you think the province will have?
That, I think, will be his difficulty in coming up with an answer. Why go? I know the reasons that some of the people around him, and he's got advisors on one side saying, oh, we should go early, and he's got other advisors saying, oh, no, this is a bad idea.
What's the reason to go early?
It has nothing to do with anything the electorate would care about, and that is they're worried that if Pierre Poilievre wins in October 2025, his first budget is going to cut spending, and that will cause all kinds of problems for them. That'll come out in April 2025. Just as the campaign is launching for Ontario. And what happens then? Liberals and NDP provincially say, aha, you can't trust a Conservative. They're just going to cut. Look at what Poilievre's doing in Ottawa. That's, behind the scenes. That's what they're talking about. But how do you justify that? What's the issue that you're going to run on? I don't think they have one yet. And that's why I know some people want it, but I don't think it's set in stone that they're going to have one.
He's certainly keeping the option open.
Yeah, he's keeping the options open, and he wouldn't say absolutely no. He did say no election this fall, but he won't say no to next spring.
I totally get why, from the Progressive Conservative Party's point of view, you'd want to have an early election, given the way Brian just announced the scenario. What is the public interest in going a year early?
Well, I mean, that's the question for Doug Ford and the Progressive Conservatives, if that's what they choose to do. I think they could potentially benefit from a confused electorate who might not know that it's early, or who might get mixed up between the federal and provincial level, and they might try to kind of take advantage of that if they were to go early. But we saw what happened in the last federal election. Justin Trudeau kind of, for the first half of the campaign, all of the questions were focused on, why are we having this? And that could be the downfall of Doug Ford's decision to go early. Facing media and facing the public, having to justify why he's doing this could overtake the issues of a campaign.
But I do think, I disagree with Brian in that I think the electorate does care about this particular election, and the Liberal Party for sure. I think they've been in electoral purgatory for 2 elections, and that's often what it is. When there's a bit of a swat to the backside to a party, it usually lasts 2 elections. It doesn't, if it lasts 3, they're in big trouble. So I think they've found their leader. I think they've found their middle ground. I think they clearly, I think, are delineating from NDP policy. I can tell now what a Liberal policy is and what an NDP policy is. And they're going to have to make the tough decision. I think they're headed in this direction, Steve, to kind of separate from the federal government. They're inviting, they've got an AGM in a couple weeks. They're inviting Dr. Jane Philpott there, who fell out with Justin Trudeau. You hear rumors about candidates maybe who were exiled from Justin Trudeau running with Bonnie Crombie. I think she's going to put a good team together, but I also think, to Brian's point, they're going to hear at the door, Trudeau, Trudeau, Trudeau. Doug Ford wants that. It's up to the Ontario Liberals to figure out how to separate. And just to go back to the NDP really quick, I think post-October 7th, pre-October 7th, I'll say, I think Marit Stiles wanted to make a concerted effort to move that party more towards the middle. For so many reasons and so many awful, horrific, tragic reasons, post-October 7th, I don't think she's been able to do that with her party. And I think they're in big trouble with the common person at the doorstep next election.
Let me just go back to the election call as we finish this off. And Brian, you probably know this question's coming, but here we go anyway. Your significant other works in the Premier's office.
Yep.
Are you likely to get a tip about this ahead of time?
I get no info. I get no info at all. So
You know why people want to ask you that question now?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Let's move on. As Jane Philpott potentially comes back into politics, Todd Smith just left politics altogether. He was education minister for how long?
Cup of coffee.
Few months.
Cup of coffee, yeah. He had a
Zero
cup of
school
coffee.
days.
Yeah, good point.
Right, 0 school days. Why does a guy who gets shuffled to education, which is a big job, $35 billion budget, why does he quit so quickly after getting the job?
I think he liked his last ministry. He was the energy minister at his new jobs in that sector now. He was passionate about it when he was in the opposition benches. He was the critic that railed against it. So it might just be he wants to do what he's interested in, but I haven't had the chance to talk to him about it.
Brian, this cabinet now, as a result of Todd Smith's leaving and other people coming, has 37 members. There has never been a bigger cabinet in the history of the province. What do we think about that?
I think it's revolting. I think it's horrible. Everybody in the PC caucus has an extra job, except, I believe, unless it's changed, Lisa MacLeod. Everybody has an extra job for
They're
extra
either in
money.
cabinet, they're on a committee, they're
Exactly.
a parliamentary assistant.
And look, it's standard that you get extra money for chairing a committee or things like that. And I'm not saying that should change, that maybe would solve this problem. Let's give MPPs a raise, something they haven't had in,
12 years?
15 years?
Yeah.
I think it was 2009.
Okay.
And so give them a raise. This is why the Premier is doing it, because MPPs are, yes, they're paid well compared to, the average person. If they're putting in the hours that they should, it's getting close to minimum wage. But they should get that raise and stop this charade going on.
Would the Toronto Sun editorially support that?
Well, I have. I
You have, okay.
I have in print. I don't know what our position is, but I mean, it's a bit of a charade now. And also bring back the pensions for them so that some of these people who are just hanging on because they have nothing else to do might go away.
Mike Harris got rid of the pensions 30 years ago. I want to go to you on this, Greg. Usually when a minister of Todd Smith's ability quits, it's a blow to the government. You don't like to see good, talented people leave your cabinet. Has that been the case this time?
I think they're in some trouble here with Jill Dunlop from a communications perspective. I also think
the new education.
Yeah, I also think there hasn't been enough scrutiny. I think you could balance the scrutiny for the international student issues between the federal government, immigration, housing, it all factors in. But I think she took her eye off the ball. It's her job not to issue the visas. That's a federal responsibility. But it's a provincial responsibility to watch the numbers. And she wasn't watching the numbers at these polytechnics, and she wasn't watching the numbers of these community colleges, and she sure wasn't watching with what we'd call diploma mills, these things. They're almost in every strip mall. Next to a Giant Tiger or a daycare center, there's a college. But I would look and I think you really need, and it's the one thing, I think opposition members, as much as they would criticize Stephen Lecce, they admired his ability to get information across. They admired his ability to keep labor peace. I think they're going to struggle with this one, and there's so many more issues post-pandemic than there was pre-pandemic. We've got to remember, Lecce had a couple years as a pre-pandemic education minister to get his feet under his ground. I don't think she presents well. I think that's going to be a problem, and I have no hesitation saying this. There was almost celebration from some of the opposition. They think they can poke holes in this minister. They do.
How much confidence, Laura, do you think the education world has in Jill Dunlop as the new minister?
I don't think the education world has a lot of confidence in any progressive conservative education minister, to be quite honest. I think when I was very surprised when I learned that Todd Smith was leaving politics. I always saw him as sort of a lifer, to be honest, and that's no insult to him. He just seems like a very political character and someone who really enjoyed it. So whether it was the timing of getting a new job, as Jessica mentioned, and maybe being a little tired of the political world and kind of looking into his future and seeing what the next couple years look like in the education portfolio. It's not a lot of fun, I don't think, for any of them in that file. But he also seems like he would take one for the team on that front. So I was surprised that he left. And looking at who was going to replace him, it's slim pickings right now in the government, to be quite honest. We've seen a lot of high-profile ministers leave, such as Monty McNaughton from the Labour file, Todd Smith, and as Ford mentioned today in his press conference, sort of confirming one of the questions, they're asking PC members to confirm whether they're running in the next election. So they may even lose some other people who have been around for 8, 9, 10 years and are looking to do something different. So I think it's going to be a tough slog for Jill Dunlop. And so much of the education file is done behind the scenes. As Greg mentioned, labor negotiations with the different unions and kind of all the behind the scenes discussion. That's a lot of work to get the trust on side with a lot of these unions that are not fans, to put it lightly, of the Ford government. So I think she's got her work cut out for her, both on the communication side, but I think mostly in how she undergoes these negotiations with the unions.
Jesse, let me move you to perhaps one of the biggest subjects that came up over the summer, which was a change in policy from previous governments, and that is this notion of so-called safe injection sites and where they are allowed to be, and I guess more importantly, where they are now no longer allowed to be, as in within 200 meters of a school or child care center. From what you have picked up in your reporting, is this, in terms of policy, is this the right move?
You know, I don't weigh in on whether things are the right move or the bad move. I can say that when the government looked into the shooting that happened outside the supervised consumption site in Leslieville, they commissioned some expert reports. They had a supervisor go in to manage the place. They had Unity Health come in and do a report. Neither of those reports suggested closing sites. One of them suggested expanding them and doing more. They all talked about the good these things do, and that does seem to be the expert consensus that you get from places like CAMH that, you know, kind of know what this is about. The Premier's been pretty clear that when he's making this decision, it's about his own personal feelings. So that's there. I know that, you know, a woman from Leslieville who had 2 kids was shot outside of one. I don't know whether that's a reason to close them down. I know it's a tragedy. I know that I've also spoken with mothers who've lost kids to toxic drugs who are passionate about keeping them open because they think maybe, you know, if I'd had one in my town, maybe my son or daughter would still be alive. So I know it's a really tough one. And I know where the sort of expert medical community stands, but it's not the whole story.
Ryan, as I mean, one of the things we try to figure out on this program is how governments make the decisions they make. So in this case, would you say the balance was the preponderance of evidence that the policy should be changed? Or, as Jesse says, is the Premier's sort of gut feeling about how this plays politically?
I think a bit of both. And you've heard the Premier talk a lot about treatment. And, both in the pages of The Sun and on the Full Comment podcast, I've interviewed a ton of people, and including in the medical community, who think or who agreed with harm reduction but said we've gone too far, that we're putting all our eggs in the harm reduction basket. The center in Leslieville, where Carolina was shot, they actually had on their website, until the supervisor went in and cleaned things up, that they had no expectations, no desire for anyone to stop using drugs. And that had become a prevailing philosophy. And so we were sold accepting consumption sites or safe supply as it's a way to get people to treatment. But then the people actually running them went in the opposite direction and said, we don't believe in treatment. Using fentanyl is a lifestyle choice. I mean, these were things that were actually said, published, printed. That's taken it away from what even previous Liberal governments had agreed to. And so there has to be a rebalance. We can't have consumption sites where it's just about allowing you to use and never saying, hey, look, there's a better option than how you're living right now. How
are you seeing it in your reporting?
Look, I think that a lot of people logically understand the benefits. And you speak with experts, you speak with people in the field, you speak with people who have experience with this. And as Jessica said, they speak very passionately about it. They've seen the benefits, they've saved people's lives, and they believe passionately that this will hurt people. I do think on the flip side, while you may logically understand it, your kind of emotional reaction to such sites is you don't like them. You don't like what you're seeing. There's something about it that bothers you. You don't like kind of
you certainly don't want it near your home.
You don't want it near your home, or you believe it's enabling in some way. Exactly. You might rationally understand it, but you don't like it. And I think that's kind of the gut reaction that the Premier is going for. I don't think there's any kind of straight answer on this one, to be honest. I think those in the advocacy world are never going to stop fighting for it. I think, maybe more so the public and certainly Premier Ford and his cabinet, and he said today he's never even been to one of the sites. He just, through his emotional feeling, objects to them. So there's kind of no right answer on which way to go.
But there's also the fact that between 2017, when we licensed our first one in Ontario, and last year, deaths from opioids more than doubled. I know there was the pandemic in there, but another reason for opening these was reduced deaths. Hasn't worked in Ontario, definitely hasn't worked in British Columbia. So if they supposedly work, maybe we're operating them wrong.
And we don't have treatment success stories either. I saw an ITV documentary on YouTube where they did this right before the '92 Olympics in Barcelona. They knew they had too many people in the streets using drugs, and so they opened a safe consumption site there in 1990. They had the Olympics in '92. But it was called 4 pillars for a reason. Some of it was also preventing crime. One of the 4 pillars is enforce the laws around these sites, and that isn't happening. I also thought it was really significant that not one, Olivia Chow, I think she was on vacation, but she put a statement out saying, I disagree with this process. But not one other Ontario mayor stood up, and many of them would probably lean more left than right, and said, this is wrong, I want the safe consumption sites. That's significant when Andrea Horwath, who ran in 4 elections as an NDP leader, a year and a half later was thanking the Premier for the announcement and documenting that every mayor will agree they need treatment. They need more treatment centers and more places for open drug users to go. But if Andrea Horwath's not in, she wants to get reelected again. She's passionate about Hamilton. So are you. You love Hamilton. It's in big trouble right now if they don't turn things around from a downtown urban perspective.
As powerful as those comments were, they were not the most powerful comments that the Premier made this past summer about something. Those were reserved for a particular Labour leader in this province, and I want to turn to that next. A couple of weeks ago at the Association of Municipalities of Ontario conference in Ottawa, 3,000 local officials from across the province arrive, and the Minister of Labour, Dave Paikin, saw Fred Hahn from CUPE, Ontario there. He approached him, and he really gave him a piece of his mind. You got to stop being such an anti-Semite, and you stop tweeting these things, 2 of which, incidentally, Fred Hahn has apologized for, that he says that even he acknowledges we're over the line. CUPE National urged Hahn to resign. He has not. Premier Ford, then at one of his press conferences, said this. Sheldon, if you please.
I just want to give my minister, David Paikin, a big shout out for his comments about Fred Hahn yesterday. I'm proud of you, David, and this guy's been a bully for 20 years. And you know what's funny? I'm getting messages on my phone from QP members saying his comments have been disgusting. In my opinion, he's a disgusting human being anyways, but that's here nor there. You know, he says he's bigoted comments. It's unacceptable here in Ontario. We have 110 nationalities speaking 200 languages, and we all need to get together. And I encourage QP Canada, someone has to discipline this guy, and I encourage the workers, next time a vote comes, vote this character out, because in my opinion, he's just a terrible, terrible human being.
Premier Ford from a couple of weeks ago. Brian, CUPE claims that Ford and Paikin are abusing their positions by saying what they've said about Fred Hahn. What do you think?
Fred Hahn is abusing his position as an officer of CUPE by being an outright anti-Semite. If you're cheering on the resistance and posting about how great the resistance rising up after October 7th, you are effectively backing Hamas, whose the organization's name translated means the Islamic Resistance Movement. They're called the Resistance. He's cheering on Hamas, and that's unacceptable.
Premier's comments, you got a problem with them?
Look, I think what the Premier said is very popular among his supporters. I think kind of this battle with Fred Hahn is the perfect for Doug Ford. I think what's been interesting to see is sort of the infighting within the union movement between the national arm of CUPE and CUPE Ontario, which recently came out and backed Fred Hahn. So that's going to be a storyline to watch, right? This isn't over. CUPE, the national arm, had asked him to resign. He did not, and then he was backed by the regional union. So, I think there's no risk for Premier Ford to come out and say that. I actually think his comments, in a way, were kind of unhelpful to what he was trying to achieve. And I'm not saying I don't think he cares. Like, I think he said what he wanted to say, and there are a lot of people, I'm sure, cheering on the Premier and Mr. Paikin for that. But I think in kind of voicing those comments, it forced CUPE to criticize Premier Ford, because they're now under pressure from their own union members not to align themselves with the Progressive Conservatives, who are not traditionally their party of choice.
How do you see it?
I think it's going to be really interesting for the Ontario NDP. That's how I see these things mostly, because they've had, as Greg referred to earlier, a really tough time since October 7th. Different positions within their, with Sarah Jamis leaving, and it's made all of their other goals hard to achieve. Just to keep the party together on that one issue has taken a lot of wind out of their sails.
How do I say this? A lot of people approach me and say things like, Fred Hahn, who's an openly gay man, say that Fred Hahn wouldn't last 5 minutes if he were living in Gaza because it's not exactly a safe space for people who are gay. And therefore, Fred Hahn is championing Hamas the way he is. I mean, this is a subject for your radio program numerous times. What are you hearing about this?
Yeah, a lot. I think, listen, I think he's got his perspective. I think we'd have all day if the criticism was simply about Benjamin Netanyahu or political strategy or military strategy or his history as prime minister. But I hear from so many CUPE members. It's so interesting because we have a text line on the show. It's so different than Twitter. Like, I think we've all given up trying to guess what an election result's going to be based on Twitter. We gave up on that with Trump and Brexit in 2016. But the text lines seem to document that CUPE members will tell me, I don't want any geopolitics. Israel could bag Sinwar tomorrow and kill him. And they don't want a union leader talking about it and sort of pitting them. This is like the least binary conflict in the world ever. It's been 70 years. It's not black or white. There's 98% shades of gray. But the point is, with Hahn, I think Jessica's point's right on. The NDP are seen as being really, really tight with CUPE. And I'll tell you, there are a lot of CUPE members who are kind of looking for a new home right now. And the Liberal Party in Ontario, I'll bring them up again, would love an endorsement from some of those CUPE unions that are like, we don't want the geopolitics. Just negotiate us a great contract. Look after our families. Give us benefits. Give us great working conditions. And I'm not sure that's Fred's MO right now.
This, Brian, I'm going to put this to you because these two are more reporters as opposed to columnists.
Yep.
You are Mr. Opinion here. So Should the Liberals or New Democrats in the next election try to seek the endorsement of QP Ontario?
I mean, I wouldn't with Fred Hahn still as president. That would be incredibly difficult, but...
Because under normal circumstances, they would, of course.
Absolutely they would. But I think Fred Hahn will still be in there. He was just recently reelected, although, like Craig, I hear from QP members, and they will say, well, it was a very small fraction. It was a rigged process. If you put it to the full membership, he wouldn't be in there. Perhaps, but yeah, I can't see Bonnie Crombie doing that. I'm not even sure I could see Merritt Stiles doing that. Although, discussion I'm hearing is, will Sarah Jama be welcomed back into caucus? And she was just endorsing Fred Hahn. I think the New Democrats might like to have Sarah Jama back in caucus, but they kicked her out for a very good reason.
I think, by the way, I thought Laura made a great point in that when I saw the Pacini moment at the AMO, I thought there's more likelihood of Hahn being booted out. And then when Ford did what he did, I think that actually hurt that momentum. Because to your point, Laura, they had to circle the wagons almost. They almost felt like it's a concerted. It's like when somebody tells a great joke and then someone says, yeah, I have a joke of my own here. Like, no, we just had a good joke and we're all laughing. We don't need your joke. You almost didn't need that the next morning of that endorsement from Doug Ford. My favorite part of the clip was the 30 workers all clapping. I don't know how they heard what he said. They're 30 feet behind him. They're like, yeah. Whatever he said was great.
But there were a lot of pressure from other unions, not just CUPE, on CUPE to do something about Hahn, even if it's just to make him go quiet, because they feel like it's damaging the entire union movement.
I think it's hard to gauge, though. It does seem like Fred Hahn has a lot of support, both within the union, and we saw this petition to support him. Whether those people are union members or not, there's certainly those in the kind of the progressive leaning side of things who like what Fred Hahn talks about in terms of the being pro-Palestinian. That's certainly how he likes to frame it, even though he apologizes for these things. And so I think he does have a lot of support. And we've seen Merritt Stiles appear with him at events, not since the most recent apology, but after he apologized for the resistance comments. I think she has appeared with him. So I'm not sure that they would disregard the endorsement of QP Ontario. I think it's still very powerful for them.
Wasn't that significant, really quick, that no Ontario NDP member said he should stay in that sort of window where it looked like that they might turf him out after the national announcement? Not one has said he should go. So which way do they land? I'm trying to get them on our show. They're not talking about Fred Hahn right now. They know if they come on live, I'm going to ask them about Fred Hahn. You probably would also. They're not talking, which is really interesting.
Right.
That last video was really powerful and really controversial. Right? I don't know if viewers didn't see it, though the video that Fred Hahn cheered on had a diver, an Israeli diver, who turned into like a bomb halfway down and blew up over Gaza. And when he apologized for it, he said, it should have been about the people, right? It's about Israel. It's not about Israelis. It's not about Jewish people. But the video didn't say that, right? The video said this is a human being turning into a bomb, and that's what crossed the line.
A Jewish person.
Yeah.
All right, with a little over 5 minutes to go, let us come full circle here and talk about, because obviously we are already into silly season, this is going to be all election all the time for the next year as we approach what everybody assumes now is going to be a spring election. What could, because he's in first place as we've established, what could disrupt Doug Ford's path to winning a third consecutive majority government, which no one in this province has done since the 1950s? It's hard to do. Jesse.
I can think of two things. One, the RCMP investigation that's going on into the affairs around the Greenbelt. If that goes really badly for him, that could obviously have an impact. The second is the reason for calling the election in the first place. I think the smart money is on him doing it after the next budget. And if they try to construct a reason for the next election and that goes poorly, if it blows up, whatever it is that they decide to tell people why they're doing the election, if it's bad, that could probably do it.
Laura.
The G word, that's what Jessica was talking about. We haven't talked about the Greenbelt much over the past summer, and in summer of 2023 was the summer of discontent for the Ford government when they were facing constant barrage of questions over their decision to open up the Greenbelt and their changing reasoning for that. And of course we had the major backtrack from Premier Ford around this time last year, and that has been quietly bubbling beneath the surface. We've heard of witnesses being interviewed by the RCMP. We don't know who those people are or where they're focusing their investigation. But if that if that spotlight turns onto the Premier's office potentially, or Mr. Ford or those around him, that could have devastating consequences for him. Whether that will happen between now and the next election, I don't know. I don't have any insights into where their investigation is, but we know that that is ongoing, and that has the potential to really turn things for the Ford government.
Brian.
The police investigation, which perhaps is another reason to go early. I mean, what will be on their side, whether they go in spring 2025 or in 2026, is the RCMP takes a long time to investigate anything. And so Doug Ford may be retired before we find out. And that's not an exaggeration if you follow our Mountie investigations. But if something did come out, that could potentially hurt him. The idea that he would necessarily, face the same fate as David Peterson, though, I think you've got to remember John Horgan in BC went early. It worked for him. Justin Trudeau in 2021, he faced a lot of criticism, lost some ground, but squeaked out a win.
Jean Chrétien
more than once. So, yeah. I mean, that's why we ended up having fixed election date laws, because Chrétien took advantage of them every chance he could. So, there's probably more pros than cons to going. I don't think he should, but you're right. It's going to be nothing but speculation until we get past either an election or the time for him to call one.
Greg.
Chrétien would have gone every 6 months if he could have. How to win 13 elections? Well, I had them every 6 months. I think the Ontario Liberals are something to watch here. Brian might disagree. I still think they're a brand. I think they're a brand. And not necessarily a party in decline. I don't think it's comparable to look at other provinces and go, well, they don't exist here. They're a non-entity here. And Steve, you've come on Toronto Today and you've talked about this. We don't like in Ontario to have too much of red or too much of blue or brown and red at the same time. The federal result looks inevitable. It looks like a walloping majority for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. So is there advanced planning for Ontario voters, even next spring, saying, how much on the right side as opposed to being more in the middle do I want? And if Bonnie Crombie can separate her policies from that of the Fed, this is a very unpopular federal government right now, if she can say this is what I'm going to do, and also, as we said at the beginning, call them out as they're the Conservatives. If you run against Doug Ford, the person, as we said a while ago, I don't think you're going to like your result. It hasn't worked so far in 2 straight elections.
It's interesting. I did not hear 3 words that I expected to hear from one of you here. Anybody want to guess what those 3 words are?
3 words.
Ontario Science Centre. Does anybody think that's a percolating issue that could cost the government seats in the city of Toronto? Jessica?
I think some people care a lot, but it's not most people.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Brian?
I don't think...
I think the Liberals already hold the seat there, don't they?
That one seat?
Yeah, so they hold that. That's the area that's going to be most upset. The polling I've seen shows that, especially when you get outside of the urban core of Toronto, people are like, oh, we're getting a new science centre? Oh, it's Ontario Place? Yeah, I'll go. So I don't think it'll cost them seats elsewhere.
And you're not even seeing the mayor of Toronto fight about it anymore. Like she campaigned to protect
you know why?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
She made a great deal offloading the DVP and the Gardner costs. And you got to give to get sometimes. So if it's not a big deal with the mayor of the city, a left-leaning mayor of the city, where the Science Centre and Ontario Place are, it's not going to be for mayors of Guelph or MPs in Sarnia. It's not going to matter.
I think it's very important to very, very important to fewer people than maybe one would think. But that is something to watch too, kind of how the Ontario Place redevelopment unfolds. If that happens on time, what the cost overruns might be. That is a major project for the Ford government. Doug Ford cares very deeply about this, so that's something to watch too, to see how smoothly that goes over the next few months.
I have time enough left to do a couple of things. Number one, we want to let everybody know that we are actually going to follow up on this conversation on tomorrow night's program. We've got a discussion with 4 mayors from large municipalities in the province of Ontario who are going to join us and talk about how they are employing new ideas to tackle homelessness and mental health issues and addiction better. So it's not, how should I put this? There are some success stories out there, and we're going to hear from some of them tomorrow night. And with that, let me thank Brian Lilly from the Toronto Sun, Jessica Smith-Cross from the Trillium, which you can get at trillium.ca.
That's right.
Laura Stone from the Globe and Mail, and Greg Brady. You can hear him in the mornings on 640 Toronto. I want to thank all 4 of you for coming into TVO tonight and helping us out with show number 1 of season number 19 here on TVO. Great to see you all.
Thank you so
Congratulations
much.
on season 19.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I find a lot of people really don't like ticks. Aside from being fascinating creatures, I think the fact that ticks bite you and they suck your blood for prolonged periods of time can make most people uncomfortable.
We tend to fear the unknown, and ticks are no exception. Students of the Ontario Veterinary College collect them in order to shed more light on what makes ticks tick.
So I'm really motivated in my research to make sure that people know about ticks and use that knowledge to empower themselves to protect themselves against ticks. They are part of a bigger system. They have individual requirements for survival, their habitat, their climate, and when they come into new areas, they interact with us. And those interactions are really important because ticks can spread things that make people and animals sick. So they really are part of a complex system.
And I feel like there's a tick in your hair.
That would be funny. My name's Katie Clow. I'm a researcher who focuses on vector-borne diseases, which are diseases that are transmitted by ticks and mosquitoes and other types of biting insects. I'm a veterinarian and I'm trained in epidemiology as well. Ticks are parasites. They feed on things that have blood and they rely on that blood for survival. Ticks are also a reflection of many of the large-scale environmental changes that are happening right now. So as we encroach into habitats and change our habitats, we can make areas more or less suitable for ticks. Human-driven climate change is making areas more suitable for ticks, and so we've seen a northward expansion of many tick populations because there are now places that they can survive because the climate has warmed. So globally, there's over 900 species of ticks, which surprises many people. In Canada, we have about 30 to 40 species of ticks, which again is surprising. But many species of ticks can feed on just a single host, so maybe a certain bird species, and don't really like humans or companion animals, and so we don't see them and they don't really pose a risk to us. In Ontario, there's 2 to 3 quite common species that we typically find on ourselves or companion animals. We have the black-legged tick or the deer tick, which is the species that can transmit the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. We have the American dog tick, which right now, other than being sort of a gross, disgusting pest, doesn't seem to be associated with any high disease risk. So if you're out in wooded, brushy areas, the tick that you're going to be most concerned about is the black-legged tick or the deer tick. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting ourselves from encountering that tick and getting bitten. There's no foolproof way of guaranteeing you won't get a tick bite, but there's lots of things that we can do to decrease the likelihood of that happening. You might have seen pictures of ticks with their arms stretched out, waiting for a host, so anything that has blood. And so ticks climb up onto low-lying vegetation to do that. And so if we stay on marked trails and out of the really brushy areas, we're less likely to come encounter with ticks that are out there waiting to find us. We can also cover up, so wearing light-colored clothing and making sure that we don't have a lot of exposed skin. The light-colored clothing helps us see the ticks easier. They're dark, and so on a light surface we can see them quite quickly. We won't feel ticks crawling on us. They're quite stealth that way, so being able to see them is really important. We can also use some bug spray, like DEET has some effectiveness against ticks. It's not completely foolproof, but it does, again, help with some repellency. And then when you get home, doing a really good tick check is important. So checking everywhere on your body, including sort of nooks and crannies along your hairline, in your underarms, having someone look across your back can be really helpful to see if there's a tick there, because the best thing to do is get it before it bites you or get it off really quickly after it bites you for sort of the best protection. We also need to worry about our companion animals, particularly our dogs, when we're thinking about the black-legged tick, because they can also get Lyme disease.
Kevin is my Texan boy. We didn't start in very good terms. He growled at me and my partner for the first 2 days of his life. Then we had a family meeting and then we talked about it, and now we're here. So when we go out and we go for more green space hikes, I like to take my favorite flea comb and comb him around, and then just try to see if I feel anything or if the comb itself grabs anything. So again, just a simple, just repetition. There's always going to be some hair coming out. Look at that fluff and then open it up. You should come, Richard. So ticks like and prefer to be in dark and, so to speak, moist places. Checking inside the ear, right in here in this area, this corner. Check sometimes around the teeth, in the gum. That one was a little bit gross when that happened. In between the toesies. They like to be on the under pads, like so on the back paw, that Kevin does not want to show us right now. And the other fun place would be around the bum area, the groin area, just like back here. I've been at the clinic for 6 years now, since 2018, and since then, and in comparison to now, definitely there's been an increase in both tick population and tick transmitted diseases. One of the things that I think it's really been a factor in this, it's not only been the change in weather, but the increase in rescue pets that have come from different countries that come with, sometimes with ticks on them, but most of the times they come with tick transmitted diseases.
We have veterinary products that can kill ticks as they feed, and so considering that for your companion animal is really important. They can come into the house with ticks on them. You want to get them off quickly for their health, and you want to make sure that if they haven't latched onto the dog, that when you're snuggling on the couch, they don't then crawl onto you inadvertently. Ticks have relatively limited movement themselves.
They don't jump. They don't fly, they don't wear capes, and they just grab.
They just grab.
They're kind of creepy little huggers.
They can only walk and sort of crawl up vegetation, but the amount that they move is quite limited.
Kind of chilling there waiting for you, and they have like their little arms up. Usually there's more than one, and they kind of just wait, and they latch on you, and when they grab you, they wait to bite you, and it's gross. We're like little dot. You won't even see them.
The reason ticks are found all over the place is ticks are expert hitchhikers. So they have been introduced into many areas because ground-dwelling birds can come in contact with ticks. Ticks will climb on them, take a blood meal, and because ticks feed for 4 to 7 days or more, you can think about a bird flying quite long distances in that amount of time. Tick dating typically happens on hosts, so they meet up on a white-tailed deer mainly, which is what the adults prefer to feed on, and the male and female will mate, and then the female stays on the deer for a prolonged period of time because once we mate, she needs a really good blood meal in order to have nutrition to grow her eggs. Ticks can lay thousands of eggs at a time. Fortunately, the survival rate for larvae, which is the stage that hatches out of the eggs, is not tremendously high, but they are still rather prolific. Although deer are a common place for many black-legged ticks to feed on, and they play an important role in the tick's life cycle because they provide nutrition for the tick, deer don't have a role in the cycle of Lyme disease. And so if they are exposed to Lyme disease, the bacteria that causes Lyme disease when a tick bites, they have the ability to clear that bacteria from their blood and they won't become infected. If we're thinking about where the tick acquires the bacteria that causes Lyme disease, these are generally small ground-dwelling mammals like chipmunks, white-footed mice, and some species of shrew. They don't get sick with the bacteria, it just resides in their system, and when the tick takes a blood meal, the tick is able to become infected. Ticks take one blood meal per life stage, and each blood meal is an opportunity to pick up a pathogen or transmit it to whatever they're feeding on.
When are ticks most active? Adults in spring, fall, and warm winters, nymphs in early summer, larvae in late summer.
So if we're talking about the bacteria that causes Lyme disease, there's very little transmission from the mom tick into the eggs, which then hatch to larvae. So most larvae hatch without the bacteria, and then they can acquire it if they feed on some small mammal that has the bacteria in their system. They're then going to molt into the next life stage and then take another blood meal, and that's when an individual, if they're susceptible to the bacteria, can become exposed. And so humans, dogs, and horses are the primary ones that we think about when we think about Lyme disease.
What are the most common signs of Lyme disease in people? Bullseye rash, fever, low energy. What are the most common signs of Lyme disease in dogs? Lameness, fever, low energy.
So ticks have a 2-year life cycle, which is actually very impressive when we think about a small little creature. Once a population is established, it's very hard to get rid of them unless you destroy their habitat, which our wild habitats are really valuable, and we certainly don't want to do that. There are no wide-scale pesticides or insecticides that would be safe for every other living creature in the environment, and so we would want to avoid doing that. And there are no other known mechanisms that are really good at getting ticks out of the environment. And so a lot of our messaging revolves around, once ticks are here, they're here to stay. There are many modifications that you can do to make your local area less hospitable to ticks. And so keeping your grass well-groomed and short. Ticks, again, as I said, especially black-legged ticks, have a really high moisture requirement, and they're not going to thrive in that type of environment. You can also put cedar chips around the edges if you border woods to, again, break up the environment between sort of the brushy area and your grass so that there's less contact in that regard. When a tick has a blood meal, the blood goes into the tick's gut, and that's where the bacteria resides. The next time a tick takes a blood meal, so after it's developed into the next life stage, the bacteria migrate up through the midgut of the tick, up into the salivary glands, and then they're ejected into the host. And that takes a period of about at least 24 hours to happen. Ticks resemble spiders a little bit to the naked eye, and so some individuals do confuse spiders with ticks, which is very understandable. On this sample, you can see some important features of ticks. So we can see that legs here, nymphs, the teenager life stage, and adults have 8 legs, so 4 on each side. This is the mouth part, and so there's 2 palps on each side. They have sort of a sensory role for the tick, and then the actual mouth part is in the middle that it gets injected into the host. And this is the area that fills with blood. So after a tick takes a blood meal, if it's allowed to feed to what we call repletion, so it finishes and it is full and it's not picked off the host in advance, it can double or triple in size and really just looks like a gray blob. An important feature on the back is this area called the scutum, and we can use both the shape and the patterning of the scutum to help identify the tick. So here you can see that the scutum is round and there's no patterning. And so we also know from other features, including the length of the mouth parts and this browny reddish area, that this is a female black-legged tick. Different tick samples, the length of the mouth parts and their appearance will differ, and as well as the patterning on that scutum. To differentiate this, I'll show you an American dog tick now. already you can probably see that the size difference is quite notable. So American dog ticks are bigger than black-legged ticks. Black-legged ticks also have longer palps, so this mouth part piece, versus here you can see that these are quite blunted on this sample. If you can see, there's patterning all over this tick's back. So that's what we call an ornate scutum, and that is characteristic of the American dog tick versus the black-legged tick. Another thing that we can see here is this scutum covers the whole back, versus here, the scutum only covers half the back. So this is a female and this is a male.
If you suspect you've come across a tick, take a photo and submit it to etick.ca.
I get a lot of people saying, well, now I know about ticks, I'm afraid to go outside, I don't want to be near them. And that's the last thing that I think I want to have happen. Nature is so important, and having a connection to nature is really important. And there's so many added benefits about being outside and so much to learn about so that we're motivated to protect what we have. And so the more you learn about ticks and know how to protect yourself, I think the more empowered people can be to take those actions to protect themselves, their family, their pets, and then go out and enjoy nature and all of the benefits that it has to offer. The stronger we have a connection with nature, we know what we're fighting for, and we have a better chance of combating our climate crisis.
And that is the agenda for Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024, and it's good to be back. Tomorrow on the program, we speak to 4 Ontario mayors on what they hope the province will do to address the homelessness and addiction crisis, and we hope you'll join us for that. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
We are where you are. TVO's current affairs journalism is available across platforms across Ontario, on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and more. Catch The Agenda, The Thread, On Poly, and other podcasts, docs, and video series on the device of your choice when you choose.